All right, this video is going to look at the two constitutional principles, popular sovereignty and limited government. This idea of popular sovereignty, don't make this harder than it is. When we look at the Declaration of Independence, we read that the source of power comes from the governed, which the governed is the people. And so Thomas Jefferson says no longer does the power come from the king or from God, but the people are the source of power of government. So the Constitution, the first words in the Constitution are we the people. So the source of power of government is the people. We are the boss of the government. Next is the idea of limited government. When the Founding Fathers created the Constitution, the goal was to create a government that had limited powers. It wanted the powers, most powers to be left up to the states and the people. They did not want this new federal government to be that powerful. So they instituted some limits on this, and as we look at each individual ones, each one of these are also going to be constitutional principles in and of themselves. So this idea of rule of law, nobody is above the law, and the law applies equally to everybody. So once again, we're fighting this idea that God gives the power to the king is above the law, the king can do whatever he wants, the rules do not apply to him. Here in the United States, rule of law is this idea that no one is above the law, not the president, not anyone in the military, not the police officers, not anyone in Congress, not anyone in the judicial branch. Everyone has to follow the same laws. We'll talk about equality under the law, extremely important. Separation of powers. Once again, this idea of separation of powers is to limit the power of the government. So instead of having all of the power in one person like a king, we are going to separate the lawmaking process versus the executing of laws versus the interpretation of the laws and applying those laws. So we have three different branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. And then we'll see even in the legislative branch, we separate that power even more. We create a bicameral legislature, so we have a House and a Senate. So these are all to limit the powers of this government. Judicial review, once again, is also a constitutional principle, but it falls under this idea of limiting the government. Congress can make a law, the president can sign the law into effect. A majority of Americans can want this law, but if the Supreme Court looks at this and decides that it is unconstitutional, that a law violates the Constitution, it cannot exist. Judicial review is the ability of the courts to determine whether acts of government, whether it's Congress, whether it's the executive branch, whether it's state government, if they are in violation, any of these acts are in violation of the Constitution, the Supreme Court can rule those, and they are null and void, and we have to get rid of those. And then this idea of the rights of the minority. There are all kinds of checks put in place to make sure that we do not have mob rule. We are not a democracy, we are a republic, and so one of the principles that we have here in the United States is even if a majority of people dislike something, we cannot violate the rights of minorities. So we have all kinds of protections put in place in the Bill of Rights. Judicial review is one of those things also that protects the rights of the minority. So all of these checks and balances, rule of law, judicial review, rights of the minority, those all fall under this idea of limiting the government. And when we look at the Constitution itself, we have several places in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Article 1, Section 10, that lists specifically things that our government cannot do. If you look at the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law. Once again, this idea, let's limit the powers of the government and have most of the power lie with the people, which once again reinforces that idea of popular sovereignty.